Is it Halloween?
I'm Batman.
Hey there, it's me, your least favorite YouTuber, the Infuso. And I thought, what better way of celebrating Michael Keaton's return to the cape and cowl in the upcoming Flash movie than by taking a look back at his Batman legacy thus far. Michael Keaton is one of the most beloved Batman to have ever donned the cape and cowl. For a lot of people, he didn't just play Batman, he was Batman. Despite not having played the part in decades, and gone on to have a stellar career with various top-notch performances in many other movies, and despite many other talented actors coming in to fill in the role, it's still probably Michael Keaton who is most often associated with the character.
Hey, who's Batman to you? Like, when you think of Batman, who's Batman?
I'm Batman.
Michael Keaton is Batman to me.
How can you put Michael Keaton in front of Christian Bale?
Beetlejuice can't be Batman.
But Michael Keaton is Batman.
No, Ben Affleck is Batman.
Michael Keaton should be eating a bud.
Is it any way you could maybe say it?
No.
Please?
No.
Will you play Batman with us, Michael Keaton? Oh, no.
Batman.
Perhaps a spot he shares with Christian Bale. Before he got the role, Michael Keaton was already a made man, a tried and true celebrity, but I think it's this particular performance that really cemented his legacy. This is the part that ensured that not only is Michael Keaton a thing now, but he will forever be a thing. He's in the history books. Now, first things first, before I go on to gush about how beloved this Batman is, I feel the need to acknowledge that this wasn't always the case. Actually, when Michael Keaton was first cast in the role, the studio faced immediate backlash. What is now celebrated was once boycotted. After the casting, Warner Brothers was bombarded with angry letters from fans expressing their concerns in the most impolite of ways. Fans felt that Michael Keaton was too physically underwhelming for the role, which is funny because I don't remember Sir Adam West being a beefcake himself. Simply put, people didn't want to see Mr. Mom destroy the legacy of Batman. You know, that legacy that hadn't really translated past the comic books at the time. I mean, this may be a hot take, but I don't think it really should be. Batman in the general public was pretty much a joke before Michael Keaton put on the cowl, at least in terms of on-screen adaptation. I mean, Adam West was great, a living legend who is unfortunately no longer living, but Adam West's Batman was almost satire. He was a pleasant parody, and the Batman brand hadn't really evolved past that. Sure, there were other versions of the character out at the time, but they all played off the tropes that were created by Adam West and the Golden Age Batman. But what's really interesting is that on paper, if you looked at Keaton's resume up until that point in time, you wouldn't necessarily know that he had the chops. He was in fact mostly a comedy actor. And while he was fantastic in all that he did, this particular character was so far removed from anything he had previously done. But then again, so was Beetlejuice that came out the year before, and Keaton knocked that one out of the park. Well, luckily, in a short amount of time, lightning would strike twice. And needless to say, the naysayers were made fools of when Tim Burton's Batman was finally released. Not only was the movie a hit, but one of the most praised aspects of the movie Batman was, of course, its titular character. The role may have been outside his resume, but it clearly wasn't outside his range. He wowed audiences and won over many of those who doubted him, not only succeeding as a valid version of Batman, but for many becoming the absolute definitive version of this character. The movie is a must-see cape classic, due in no small part to the brilliant performance put in by Michael Keaton, a role that has set the character on his current path today. Keaton was the blueprint, the starting point for the darker turn within the character. Even if Michael Keaton isn't your favorite Batman, the chances are that he was vital within the creation of your favorite Batman. I think there are really a lot of nuances that are easy to overlook just because there's so much to love on the surface. We have never gotten another Batman like him, and quite frankly, I don't think we ever will. But I think that's also part of what makes it so special, is that this was a once-in-a-lifetime performance. This is something that is often emulated but could never truly be duplicated. What I've always appreciated from Michael Keaton's time in the role was the separation of Bruce and Batman. It's really interesting because this iteration of the character's dual identities are differentiated completely differently than any other interpretation. True, this Bruce Wayne never really develops a larger-than-life socialite persona, and whether he's masked or unmasked, he still stays in shadow. Even at gatherings or social events he hosts, he acts like the perfect wallflower, blending into his surroundings seamlessly. Despite being a local celebrity, he was still virtually unknown and unrecognizable to Gothamites because of how little had ever been seen of him. We're not talking about somebody who doesn't like making waves. We're talking about somebody who practically doesn't produce puddles. As opposed to the split of person and persona, these movies offer a split between man and myth. Batman doesn't feel like a separate identity to Bruce Wayne, and Bruce Wayne doesn't feel like a facade for Batman. It's kind of hard to articulate. The character feels consistent all throughout, but it's almost as if Batman is just the summation of the darkest parts of Bruce Wayne. In the 1989 Batman movie, Batman is publicly thought of as an urban legend. He's spoken of in passing, and just about everyone's heard of him, but not many have seen him. Those who have encountered the Dark Knight aren't exactly law-abiding citizens, so they're not thought to be reliable narrators. Local law enforcement disregards the suspicions and treats him like a tall tale, but he's still real enough to scare the superstitious, cowardly lot that is the criminals of the underworld. Not every criminal is a believer, but his reputation is frightening enough to cause some cold-hearted thugs to spend their time looking over their shoulders. We see how Batman builds the brand. Every action he takes seems statistically calculated. Sure, all these action shots we see of the Dark Knight in action are phenomenal with or without context. The visuals these movies offer up really add to the overall mystique that this character embodies. However, I think it goes a little bit further than just being awesome in appearance. The surreal and otherworldly way the character moves around, the way that he presents himself, typically hidden under a veil of smoke or from within the shadow. I don't think any of this was done by mistake either. Every aspect of this is a well-constructed attempt at creating a monster that preys on the violent and serves the vulnerable. The theatrical way he goes about all that he does, it's all made to not only serve the audience, but to serve the narrative as well. This wasn't just all done for our benefits at home. Batman doesn't move about and do what he does just because it looks cool. These over-the-top entrances he makes are made to make an impression. Bruce is intentionally trying to strike fear in the hearts of the criminal underground of Gotham City, which is why he demands that those he apprehends warn their circles about him, continuing to spread the word of the Caped Crusader, becoming a symbol of fear. I like this because it shows how deep the fight against crime goes for this Batman. He's not only trying to stop current criminals, he's also actively trying to dissuade other potential criminals through fear. Everything about the way this Batman acts, from the slight alteration in his voice when he puts on the mask, to his borderline bizarre, somewhat supernatural mannerisms as Gotham's Guardian. I mean, granted, a lot of his movements may also have been stifled and unnatural looking because of just how confining that suit really was. But even if there was some additional, unintentional, stilted strangeness, I think it does more to add to the character rather than take away. There's a natural intimidation factor present with this big screen Batman. He's consistently calm, cool, and collected, even in moments where he probably shouldn't be. In the face of chaos, he remains visibly unchanged. He meets danger head-on and never once breaks eye contact. His presence alone is enough to truly terrify wrongdoers, and rightfully so. He speaks as if his words are absolute certainties, as if what he's saying is simply a matter of fact, no matter what it is that he's saying. This is a Batman who doesn't offer up threats, but instead promises and warnings. Never once does it feel like this personality is put on. It feels far too fluent for it to be an act. He's a shadow in a city full of people, an unknown watchful eye lurking over the city for protection, a silent silhouette ready to save victims and stop victimizers. Batman is very much a myth. Though in that same sense, Bruce Wayne himself is almost just as much of an urban legend. He's a stranger to the society that he protects. He spends most of his days locked away from the very same civilization that he spent his nights protecting, missing public events he's scheduled to attend and departing the few parties he throws early. Bruce doesn't have much of a public image. He's definitely a notable name, but there's not really a face accompanying that name. He's a ghost amongst the living. Whereas later variants of the character would make it seem as if Bruce intended on distancing himself from the world around him, Tim Burton's Batman makes it feel as if that all happened by happenstance. Bruce doesn't mean to put the world on the back burner, it's just that he overly prioritizes his quest for justice, devoting the vast majority of his time to stopping crime and saving lives any way he can. His passion for doing what's right is constantly on display, and it comes across with every action and micro-action he takes. When this Bruce Wayne does attempt to have a social life, it doesn't feel like it's always for the sole purpose of acquiring intel. He does attempt to have friendships of sorts and pursue relationships. What I love about this is that it shows that being Batman doesn't stop Bruce Wayne from being a man. While Keaton's Bruce is still chock full of his signature stoicism, it doesn't come at the expense of other personality traits. Keaton is almost consistently serious and somewhat stern, but these movies don't make the character monotone or one note. He's not some stick in the mud who can't enjoy a laugh. And I enjoy that aspect of this portrayal because it makes Bruce feel more like a human being than a comic book character. Don't get me wrong, I love Batman. Clearly, look at this channel. Sometimes it feels like the character is written into such extremes that it could come across like self-parody. But I think Tim Burton and Michael Keaton did everything just right. They towed the line in such a way that it made Keaton identifiable as Batman, but it didn't necessarily hold him down to the idea of just being Batman. They did everything, and they never once overdid anything. They told you enough about the character, but they never took it too far. Whereas a lot of Bruce Waynes are depicted as being secluded, I wouldn't necessarily say that that's the case for this one. There's certainly an element of that, but he comes across less like a recluse and more just like a private person. This Batman wasn't a prisoner to his sadness. He was a survivor of his suffering. It's kind of beautiful because we see a man who has these issues, but he's not just the sum of these issues. There is much more to Bruce Wayne than problems. He's a person. Or, at the very least, here he's making an effort to be one. Bruce is enjoying life to the best of his abilities. The only problem is that there's no utility belt for his personal life. As Bruce, he can come off as effortlessly likable, but in actuality, it's probably quite effortful for a man who'd prefer to walk on city rooftops rather than city streets. Now, in contrast to his stonewall nature as Batman, as Bruce, he could at times come off as a little bit goofy or absent-minded. And he's not above losing his cool and having an occasional outburst from time to time. And yet, despite how conflicting this may sound, it never feels that way. As a matter of fact, it feels very coherent. He never does anything that feels unwarranted, and all these elements combine to flesh Bruce out and make him feel more like a man than a 2D cartoon character. Christopher Nolan did his best to make the world of Batman feel like the real world in the Dark Knight series, and he did a truly incredible job that deserves to be commended. However, Tim Burton did his best to make Batman feel like a real person living in the world of Batman. And for me, I think that makes for a much stronger iteration. More than anything else, I think Michael Keaton's Bruce Wayne comes off as sincere. He's an imperfect but perfectly pleasant person who means well but isn't immune to screwing up. He's a good guy, but he's not the best guy. When it comes to his personal life, he makes mistakes. What's really interesting is that this doesn't feel like a Bruce Wayne who's just learning how to be Batman. In a lot of ways, it feels like a Batman who's just learning to be Bruce Wayne. There's an awkwardness that comes across in every interaction he has. Whether he's flustered by the attention of a beautiful blonde, or just getting ruffled in his standard day-to-day conversation, he seems so much more uncertain of himself as Bruce than he does as Batman. Even when he's concerned, this Batman approaches every situation with the utmost confidence, sometimes to a fault. It's clear that this man's comfort zone lies within the Batcave, and the second that cowl comes off, he's every bit as confused and clueless as everyone else. Michael Keaton did a really good job of making Bruce Wayne feel like an ordinary guy, which is no easy feat. The guy is one of the most iconic vigilantes of all time, and when he's not out fighting crime, he's one of the most famous fictional billionaires of all time. It's incredible how, despite all of that, Michael Keaton and Tim Burton were able to make Bruce Wayne come across as an everyday average Joe. Somehow they managed to make the extraordinary look extraordinary. Michael Keaton managed to make Batman feel larger than life, while making Bruce Wayne feel down to earth. And he did so while managing to make both of these sides feel one and the same. Two sides of the same story, that when put together reveal the whole picture. These movies don't really showcase any extreme dysfunction one side of the character causes the other. I think if anything, more than in any other case, Bruce and Batman function and operate pretty fluidly in this. I mean, yeah, he definitely does hit a couple of speed bumps in his relationships, usually brought on by his nighttime extracurricular activities, but even then so, it doesn't feel like it takes that much of a toll on that aspect of his life. The endless hours, the sleepless nights, and a never-ending mission for an ultimately unattainable goal are probably bigger downsides, drawbacks, and obstacles of his chosen career path. The trauma from witnessing his parents' demise at such an early age clearly has taken a toll on his development. It's a sore subject that he doesn't really bring up, but constantly reflects on. Rereading old newspaper clippings from the event, leaving roses in the alley in which they died. Those parents aren't often spoken of, they're silently impactful in a couple of different ways. Bruce seems forever changed and unwell. He's not on the verge of psychosis or anything, but it's evident that he still doesn't have all his issues worked out. Clearly, judging by where he spends his nights. Which is why he's so often caught in a 1,000-yard stare. It almost seems like he's stuck in a state of shock that he never fully recovered from. He's not continually shut off, but he's consistently stuck in neutral. This Bruce Wayne may be psychologically damaged, but he also exists outside of his own mental torture. When he's not deep in thought or lost in his own misery, this Bruce Wayne could be cunning and clever, an intellectual competitor to business tycoons and crazed clowns alike. He could also come off as charming to many of the women in his life, though often that's not really by design. What is very evident, however, is that this Bruce Wayne is a good guy, something that's clear even from afar. He barely has a public presence to speak of, and yet all of it's wrapped up in goodwill, a far cry from the public persona a lot of us are used to now. I spoke earlier about the problems a lot of people seem to have with his physical appearance, thinking that he wasn't threatening looking enough to portray Batman, but I think that's actually more of a positive than it is a negative. He looks completely unsuspecting, an unidentifiable everyday guy, and I think that's sort of perfect for a secret identity. If he doesn't look like he could be Batman without the mask on, then good, because no one's supposed to know that he's Batman when he doesn't have the mask on. This is a good thing, not a bad thing.
I see this as an absolute win.
As always, Bruce Wayne is Mr. No Days Off. He's so consumed with working and looking after others that it's easy for him to forget to look after himself. You really get the feeling that Alfred is an absolute necessity in Bruce's life, as he mindlessly goes about his mission day in and day out. While Batman tends to Gotham, it's Alfred that tends to Batman. It goes beyond just doing his job. He clearly cares for Bruce, and he takes care of Bruce more than Bruce cares for or takes care of himself. I think this Alfred really serves as what grounds this Batman to reality. Without Alfred's constant interference and subtle guidance, I really think this Bruce would go off the deep end. He clearly wouldn't look after himself the way that he should, and would probably be far less inclined to engage with the general public. When left to his own devices, Bruce neglects his basic needs. These movies paint a picture that Alfred is sort of this unseen pillar that keeps Wayne Manor intact. Make no mistake, despite the quest for justice and a request for normality, there is nothing that isn't abnormal about this Batman's life. Case in point would probably be the general dysfunction of this Batman's love life. In Batman 89, we see Bruce and Vicky Vale try to make things work. Despite their obvious feelings for each other, Bruce's need for privacy pushes Vicky away. When he finally comes clean and tells her the truth, she has a better understanding of the situation, but ultimately, it just doesn't work out. Bruce's double life scares her, and his honesty about his secret life provides very little comfort. It almost feels like this relationship was doomed from the start. Vicky was just too different. She was too, well, for lack of a better word, normal. She was white picket fences, and he was a dark and gothic castle. Not exactly a winning combination. When he does finally meet someone on the same spectrum as him, it's Lena Kyle, an equally damaged individual with dueling identities, a costume counterpart just as wrapped up in chaos. If Vicky and Bruce's relationship failed because the two were too different, then this one failed because the two were very much the same. I mean, sure, yeah, they had conflicting moral compasses, but they were both two headstrong people with very large personalities created by traumatic events. It's almost as if that's what drew them to each other. They subconsciously sensed it. The two actors had an absolutely incredible amount of chemistry that has never truly been duplicated. I can understand people who say this isn't their Batman, and I can understand people who say this isn't their Catwoman, but I can absolutely not understand people who say this isn't their Batman and Catwoman. As far as I'm concerned, this is without question the definitive pairing of the two. It has never been this good before, and it will never be this good again. They were instantly iconic. I have a lot more to say about this pairing, but perhaps that's better saved for a Michelle Pfeiffer Catwoman video in the future. I think a lot of what works with the duality of this character has to do with presentation and perception. One of the greatest elements of the first film was how it showcased Batman and Bruce Wayne, letting the audience get to know Bruce Wayne as they were slowly figuring out Batman. There's a much more relaxed feeling when the story follows Bruce Wayne. You're able to gauge his perspective and gain some sort of insight as to how he thinks and feels. Now, in contrast to that, a lot of the time when we're shown Batman, we're not shown Batman from his own accounts. We're shown Batman through the eyes of others. Not always, but enough of the time. I think this is an incredibly smart move that distanced the audience from the actual character. This way, we're just as enthralled seeing Batman leap into action as the criminals he comes up against. I mean, we're provided much more comfort than them, as we're not going to be making a hospital visit, but, you know. On the subject of Batman, I also want to compliment the way these movies handle the character. While this Batman beats up and brutalizes the bad guys he comes across, he's not some hyper-aggressive hero. He's shown to use his brain just as much as his brawn, investigating problems and coming up with solutions, aiding the public in surviving the Joker's chemical warfare, hacking hardware to reveal corrupt politicians to the city's citizens. He's not just some one-trick baddie. He does it all, and he does it all for the right reasons. I think Tim Burton and Michael Keaton deserve all the credit in the world for recreating and, more importantly, revitalizing this character and the brand. It's because of them and the success of these films that the character got to publicly evolve into the icon he is today. Even if this isn't your Batman, this is the performance that paved the way and served as a blueprint for nearly every Batman to come out since then. I'm not saying every performance after Keaton has been trying to replicate him, but I am saying that this particular performance definitely re-established who Batman is in general. And everyone who has ever played Batman after him has played a version of Batman that has Keaton's Batman ingrained in their DNA. What I can say with complete certainty is that more than any other Batman, I always looked forward to seeing this one. Mask on or mask off. That may not sound like high praise, but let me just go down the list for you. You got Val Kilmer, good Bruce Wayne, a little goofier on the Batman side of things. George Clooney, terrible all around, don't want to talk about him. Christian Bale, incredible Bruce Wayne, horrible Batman. Robert Pattinson, great Batman, no Bruce Wayne. Ben Affleck, great Bruce Wayne, good Batman, horrible writing. Michael Keaton, all around great. However, while this may very well be peak Batman, this Batman is not perfect by any means, because as I've said before, Batman doesn't kill. Now, I will give some leeway. I think that an exception to the rule could be valid. If you put Batman in a certain situation where he's pressed for time and stuck in a no-win situation, other lives are at stake, I do think that Batman would reluctantly take a life to save millions of others, yes. However, this Batman killed these thugs with no hesitation even when he wasn't in a race against the clock. I know there are some diehards out there that really want to save this and say, oh, well, we didn't see on screen if they died. Him being an attempted murderer does not make him any better. That just means he would have murdered them, but he was bad at it. If the intent is there, then it breaks the rule. The rule isn't Batman doesn't successfully kill, it's that Batman does not attempt to kill. So we're just gonna have to accept it, okay? This Batman kills. I wouldn't say that he's a cold-blooded killer. He's not brutalizing every bad guy that he comes across, but he picks and chooses the punishments that he deals out. Every new case is an individual case that he handles differently. There is no singular Batman beatdown formula. There's no rhyme or reason for this Batman's punishments. He just dishes out whatever he sees fit in that present moment. Which looks cool, but, you know, just doesn't feel very Batman-y. Batman should hold the value of life exceptionally higher. Because ultimately, despite being a very skilled fighter, Batman doesn't want to hurt people. He wants to heal them. I mean, sure, yeah, he'll break both your arms to do so, but there are limits to this thing. This Batman is blowing up discount Bam Bam Bigelow, having flame swallowers be swallowed by flames, and willingly and intentionally killing bad birthday party entertainers. This is a pretty big no-no. The antithesis of what this character stands for, and yet despite that, I still think Michael Keaton's Batman is one of the greatest Batmen to ever grace the big screen. For me, there are problems with this version of Batman, but Michael Keaton is none of them. This isn't just one of the greatest Batman performances of all time. This is one of the greatest comic book movie performances of all time. Quite frankly, no hyperbole here, I truly believe, without Tim Burton and Michael Keaton, the Batman we know wouldn't be the Batman we know today.
I am vengeance. I am the night. I am Batman.
I'm talking about the greatest Bruce Wayne of our time or any time thereafter. and dare I say, the undisputed definitive Batman. Because if there is an argument to be made that Kevin Conroy isn't the best Batman there ever was, then I haven't heard it. Voicing the character for 3 decades in more than 2 handfuls of projects. We're talking cartoons, TV shows, shorts, movies, video games. He performed the role more than anyone else ever has, more than anybody else ever will, and more than anyone else would ever be asked to. He is widely accepted as the absolute best, and it's not very hard to see why. Because Kevin Conroy didn't just play a part. He defined a role for several generations of fans. He set a standard that every other Batman is held up to. He was the bar setter, the unattainable goal. Kevin's impact on the character can't be understated. He didn't just put on a performance, he gave a character a voice. There were actors who played the part both in voice acting and in live action before him, but none of them are nearly as iconic. And I truly think that he gave the most authentic performance anyone has ever given and anyone could ever hope to give to The Dark Knight. Being the first man to create a separation between Batman and Bruce Wayne. As Bruce, he sounded naturally charming, confident to the point of becoming a little bit cocky. And being that Bruce Wayne in nature is just a disguise, he'd more often than not sound realistically oblivious and naive. Of course, Bruce Wayne is just a front that Batman uses to probe those he comes in contact with for information, as Bruce knew that you could learn a lot more by playing dumb than you could by showing off smart. What I really love about this version of Bruce Wayne is that it was a believable front, but it didn't go so far as to destroy the persona's reputation. It did what it needed to do without going a step too far. You wouldn't believe that this Bruce Wayne was in fact Batman. The guy wasn't smart enough to be Batman, he wasn't strong enough to be Batman, he wasn't selfless enough to be Batman. But he also wasn't written to be cruel or crude in the public eye. Of course, ultimately, he really only showed interest in being in the public eye when it was to investigate incognito. This Bruce Wayne didn't come across as a bad guy, but instead a rather delusional one who rarely steps outside his bubble. This made for an interesting development, because what we got was a Bruce Wayne who wasn't above doing good deeds without a mask on. He made for a very fair and balanced billionaire. I really appreciate this little self-crossover. Watching the alter ego of the character actually melt into or break through the secret identity. Kevin managed to make Bruce seem arrogant and maybe even a little bit ignorant in the public, but never to the point of full-on villainy. In short, this Bruce Wayne wasn't a bad guy. What's unfortunate about all of this is that I think that this side of the character is forgotten in comparison to how incredible the other half of this role is. But I do think regardless this deserves some level of praise. Unfortunately, it wouldn't all be like this, as Bruce Wayne the public figure is probably the least interesting part of Batman. So gradually over time, we'd see less and less of his portrayal of this part of the role. But to be fair, the name of the brand isn't Bruce Wayne. In contrast, Kevin Conroy had a completely different voice for the role of Batman. One that commanded attention from audiences and demanded fear from the thugs that he'd encounter. Kevin's Batman was stern and stoic, and yet he could perfectly articulate the character's feelings at any given moment. The character may have mostly been monotone, but Kevin had such a great emotional range that came through with each and every line. You always knew what his Batman was feeling, even if he mostly spoke in one of 2 tones, those being harsh and harsher. There was something so effortlessly powerful and imposing about this performance. His voice could strike fear in the heart of superstitious cowardly lots, but it never sounded like he was trying to sound scary. He came across as naturally intimidating, a force you didn't want to reckon with. And it wasn't just the sound of his voice. It was the confidence in the way that he spoke, as if all that he said was a certainty. When he issued a threat, you believed it. His interrogations always felt incredibly legitimate because the fear he was met with was well warranted. This Batman was an imposing figure of justice, a scary sight if you were on the wrong side of the law. Kevin's voice created the perfect mystique for a character who at times could be more of a symbol than he was a man. Even beyond terrorizing terrorists, this Batman was powerful. His strength was incomparable to others. I mean, sure, physically Superman could take him, but mentally this man was unstoppable. The legacy the character had built up was not that of mere mortal men. He sounded sage-like in his speeches. He was an authority figure with an incredible sense of control, fathering over a surrogate family, acting as trainer, mentor, and dad to those he shared a cave with. A lot of the time, when people think of Batman, they seem to think of vengeance. And it's somewhat warranted. That is definitely a part of the character. But that's not the only part of that character. And if you ever found yourself questioning that, then look no further than this Batman's incredible, immeasurable amount of compassion. He always had a soft spot for others, no matter how rough his exterior was. The guy always had his guard up, and he would never fully let on just how much he cared with words, but instead with his actions. And that also made the few kind words he did share that much more meaningful. This Batman was a true humanitarian. He was always doing good deeds through a hidden veil, never once seeking credit for his right doings. And I personally think that speaks a lot about the masked man who doesn't speak a lot. Because it's not who you act like in the light, but rather who you are in the dark that defines you. Some of the character's greatest moments in the series don't come from him beating up bizarre bad guys, but instead come from comforting others in their darkest moments. We're not just talking about civilians and protégés. Batman met his enemies with the same level of empathy that he met his closest allies with. He was selfless to a fault. He was a man who spent a lifetime taking bullets that weren't aimed at him, eating punches that weren't thrown his way initially, stopping revenge plots that he wasn't the target of. This Batman was so altruistic in nature that if anyone else was in the role, it might seem fictitious. The character's actions are just a little bit too good to be true. But with Kevin in the role, you never once questioned this Batman. Because even at his most far-fetched, he never seemed anything but legitimate. Batman on the animated series was also never painted as the paragon of perfection. He was a flawed individual. He made mistakes. He wasn't exempt from rushed or rash decisions from time to time. On occasion, he'd even do something that he'd later regret, but he would still go out of his way to try to make it right, even if there was no realistic way of doing so. So while Kevin Conroy as Batman was pretty perfect, Kevin Conroy's Batman himself was not. He wasn't some faultless, flawless figure of all that was good. He was just a man. This was a Batman that represented mankind, warts and all. A mortal man who was in real mortal danger every night. It's been said 1,000 times over, including by Kevin Conroy himself, but when it comes to Batman, especially this Batman, Batman is the man, Bruce Wayne is the mask. While he may have been born Bruce Wayne, it's not his true chosen identity. Bruce Wayne is the performance that he puts on in public to disguise his true nature, his real identity. And when Bruce Wayne puts on that Batman mask, that's when he's truly himself. In his private moments, the few that he has, not only does he very often wear his mask, even in some moments when it doesn't really make sense to, but it's also the voice that he speaks in. That's because this is his real voice. The show doesn't really suggest this, it kind of comes right out and says it.
Hey, what's up, Doc?
You have bats, Mr. Wayne.
Appreciate the help, Doc. I'll return the favor next time you're raising funds. Bye-bye.
This computer checked that.
We have ourselves an incongruity.
Incongruity, Alfred? He's lying. And I'm gonna find out why.
I won't have Wayne Enterprises involved in an operation that destroys a rainforest. Shut it down or you're gone.
One of my greedy directors made a deal. I hate it when things slip by me.
I said to them, you know, he's the wealthiest man in Gotham. He's the most eligible bachelor. Everyone knows him. He's got the big house on the hill. How can this guy put on a cape and a cowl and no one knows him? That's just impossible. Why don't you let me do two voices? And let me use my own voice for Bruce Wayne. And then I'll use the voice that I used in the audition for Batman. So that's where the two-voice idea came up.
This fact is made that much more clear later on in Batman Beyond, when an elderly Bruce Wayne hears voices, and he's only able to tell that they're not internal because
The voice kept calling me Bruce. In my mind, that's not what I call myself.
What do you call yourself?
all of this is packed into one role that admittedly is divided into two, what with the dual identities and all. This was a lot to ask of any actor. Kevin pulled it off. He not only managed to bring a legend to life, but also humanize him and ground him in reality. explore a truth and a depth to this character that nobody had before. And because of that, I think more than in any other Batman performance both before or after, this Batman felt the most like a man. He felt like a real person, a deeply troubled, well-meaning, socially disconnected outsider that looked down on the city he lived in and the civilians that inhabited it, rather than walk amongst them. A man whose past trauma still haunted him and dictated both his present and his future. With Kevin Conroy, Batman felt real. Kevin Conroy made this 2D character feel very three-dimensional. On top of perfecting both sides of the character and defining it for generations to come, the character never stopped developing. It was constantly progressing through the Tim and Diniverse timeline. We watched this Batman grow up and grow old and pass the torch eventually. And even in his later years when his body failed him, he continued to contribute to crime fighting, becoming the mentor and an extra set of eyes when future Batman Terry McGinnis took over, serving somewhat of an oracle role in this particular story. It's very much what Ned would describe as a guy in the chair situation. So when this Bruce Wayne had next to nothing left, he still gave all that he could for the greater good. This Bruce Wayne is much more experienced. His bitterness has only been that much more amplified over time. From a lifetime of bad experiences and sad situations, he's much more sour than he was when he was younger. You have to understand that this Batman is one that has lost almost everyone he loved, whether that be physically, emotionally, or mentally. At this point, bitter Bruce is alone with his memories. Everyone has either left him or died off. No wife, no kids, and no friends to speak of. Well, unless you count Ace. He's living out what may be his last days as an unseen hermit. The man who once lurked in the shadows of Gotham City is now stationed in the shadows of Wayne Manor. The world around him slowly passed him by, and yet he was seemingly indifferent to it, but still felt the need to involve himself in heroics. Because Batman isn't just a mask, it's a state of mind, a lifestyle, an identity. His identity. And while the legacy of Batman may live on without him, much like Bruce Wayne to comic book fans, Kevin Conroy will always be Batman. What also definitely deserves praise is the chemistry that he had with all of the cast of Batman the Animated Series. How perfectly he and Mark Hamill played off of each other. How well he and Tara Strong worked together. The banter and back and forths between he and Lauren Lester. Everyone Kevin worked with on the show worked wonders with him, and vice versa. What I truly think is remarkable here, though, is the time that we get with this character. Kevin's time in the role was a remarkable combination of both quality and quantity. He's voiced the character more than anybody else, and there's a good reason for that. Because the studio figured, why create another interpretation of the character when we have the definitive version of this character right here? Following Batman the Animated Series, Kevin would go on to portray the character in all different media related to the show. He played Batman in multiple movies, continued voicing Batman in various video games over the years. He even played Batman in other TV shows. There's a whole timeline, a whole universe filled with this Batman. But that's far from the only fictional universe with him as the voice of Batman, because Kevin Conroy wound up voicing this specific version of the character outside of his continuity, lending his legendary vocal cords to the role yet again in Teen Titans Go and Scooby-Doo and Guess Who, and most recently, the multiverses. I really appreciate these appearances because it allowed Kevin to play the role he made famous, but under a different light, and we saw that this specific serious Batman could also be played for laughs. This was a perfect performance that would have been more than enough to validate the claim of Kevin being the greatest Batman of all time. But as if to solidify that opinion and turn that into a matter of fact, Kevin would go on to voice the character in the equally iconic Arkham series. I can't really talk in depth about his performance in Arkham without unnecessarily repeating myself, because pretty much what could be said for his time in the Arkham series is a copy and paste of what could be said about his time in Batman the Animated Series. As a matter of fact, I can't continue to talk about Kevin's performance in any of these without sounding overly repetitive. The performance didn't change from canon to canon because it never needed to. There was something that was truly timeless and certain about Kevin's take on the character. After its initial run, it didn't improve over time because there wasn't anything to improve upon. Kevin understood the character and perfectly personified it. And he'd also play the character in other video game continuities as well, like in Injustice, where he played 2 separate versions of the Dark Knight from different Earths. Or DC Universe Online, where his Batman looks like this. He and fellow DCAU alum would reunite in the Superman-Batman animated movies, Justice League Doom, and Justice League Flashpoint Paradox. Interestingly enough, he'd also portray Christian Bale's version of the Dark Knight in the movie Gotham Knight, which was an animated anthology that took place in between Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. He'd voice the character yet again in Justice League Action, as well as play Batman in various shorts and even storyboards for other movies over the years. He'd also play the Batman of Zur-En-Arrh on Batman the Brave and the Bold. But his work with the Caped Crusader didn't end there. In 2019, the unthinkable happened. After voicing the role for close to 3 decades, Kevin Conroy was given the ability to play the role in live action, appearing once more as an elderly Bruce Wayne, with a decidedly much more cynical and sinister twist. This Bruce Wayne was unlike any other version of the character Kevin Conroy ever portrayed. He was a deeply jaded Bruce who had lost his way and went rogue. A former Batman who broke his code and just continued breaking it, taking the lives of villains and other heroes alike. A Batman who lacked any remorse for his moral failings. A Batman who had lost his hope in humanity and wasn't looking for it after. It was a shockingly different take on the character for sure, and furthermore, the character that Kevin played. I know some fans had their issues with this, not necessarily with Conroy's performance, but instead with the use of the iconic actor. But honestly, I think the fact that this ever happened is still something worth celebrating. Seeing Kevin Conroy live and in the flesh play the character he's voiced for decades left me speechless. This was something I never thought I'd see, and it's something that he himself never thought would be a possibility.
Never thought I'd get a chance to do it on camera because I was getting older and older and older. I was sort of aging out of Batman, you know. But luckily I aged into old Bruce Wayne.
You can tell that he was really excited about the prospect of playing the part in person. I should also note that this take on the Dark Knight isn't unmerited. This version of the character didn't originate in this CW special. There are elements used for this variant of the Dark Knight that were assembled using plenty of other Batman interpretations. His thought process isn't unlike another aged Batman of the future. His views on Superman and his perception on how he bows to authority rather than his own moral compass is practically taken right out of The Dark Knight Returns. It's also not unlike his mentality in Batman v Superman, which was also heavily inspired by that very comic. His appearance is taken from another very popular comic, which also included an elderly Bruce Wayne held together by exoskeleton, that being the graphic novel Kingdom Come. Outside of his work as Batman, he's also appeared in many other Batman continuities as other characters within continuity. Playing Dick Grayson's father John in The Batman, playing Bruce's father Thomas in Batman vs. Robin, and playing the Phantom Stranger in Batman the Brave and the Bold. And his time in the role still hasn't come to an end, as it's now confirmed that Kevin Conroy did lend his voice to Batman in the upcoming Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League game. And who even knows if that's the last time we'll hear that voice coming out of that character. Kevin personified Batman, and will forever be embedded into the history of this character. The two have a very symbiotic relationship, because Batman made Kevin Conroy's career, and Kevin Conroy helped make Batman's legacy. When a lot of people think of Batman, they think of Kevin Conroy as Batman. When I read comics, it's his voice I hear in my head when I'm reading that dialogue. Whenever a new Batman voice actor is cast, this is the unachievable performance that they're inevitably compared to. It's the performance that most voice actors try to duplicate or at least emulate. Kevin Conroy did so much more than just play a character. He defined what it meant to play that character. There are many other good and even great Batman performances both in live action and in animation, and I don't think any of them even come remotely close to Kevin's work. There are other Batmans out there that I like and even some that I love, but each of them really feel like an actor playing a part, which, you know, to be fair, they are. And for the record, some of them play that part very, very well. But Kevin Conroy didn't feel like he was playing a part. Kevin Conroy felt like he was that part. Like, he was the character. All these other actors are just playing Kevin Conroy playing Batman. But Kevin Conroy, he was the real deal. The definitive Batman. It seems to me like a very big reason why he was so indescribably awesome in the role is because he felt what the character felt. In 2022's DC Pride, Kevin Conroy wrote a story that shared his own experiences. And like Bruce Wayne, he too had a rough upbringing filled with heartbreak and tragedy. Which, by the way, I would really recommend getting your hands on a copy and checking it out for yourself. Having a troubled family life, looking after his mentally ill brother after his alcoholic father's suicide attempt, living his life as a gay man during the AIDS epidemic, watching as those closest to him withered away in pain, never knowing if he himself would come down with that same sickness, living with the fear that what took his friends would take him next. Kevin, like Bruce, dealt with incredible hardships that no one should ever have to endure. When he grew up, people were far less accepting of one's sexuality. What's celebrated now was condemned back then. And because of this, Kevin grew up closeted, living with a secret that was deeply tied into his identity that he could never share. Bruce too had deep secrets about his identity, cloaking himself in a public persona while keeping his true self hidden in private. Kevin's real-life secrecy and suffering informed the character. This Batman felt real because the pain behind that voice was real. All of that came from a very real place. Kevin related to the character on levels most people would never fully be able to. In some ways, it feels like he gave a part of himself to create this performance. He opened himself up and shared with us some of his life experience through Bruce Wayne, through Batman. He took all the bad that life threw at him and he used it to create something great. Just as Bruce's agony turned him into a hero for Gotham City, Kevin's agony turned him into a hero to the world. Amongst his incredible work and all that he did to define the character, what shouldn't go understated is his own character. While I didn't know Kevin personally, from everything I've ever seen or heard about the guy, he was an incredibly pleasant person. I have never heard so much as one negative interaction or encounter with him. He was a kind man who just wanted to share his passion with the world and help others find the inspiration that they've been looking for. There was a very energetic enthusiasm that went into everything that he did, even something simple like a cameo. Giving thoughtful, insightful answers to the questions that he was asked, or acting the holy hell out of my outro. Seriously, I will never be able to articulate just how much that meant to me, that he put so much effort into making that. It's like the modern day equivalent to having a celebrity record the message to your answering machine. And he treated it like he was going in to read lines with Mark Hamill. I've been working on a very big, very in-depth video on Batman the Animated Series as a whole. It's taken me a really long time, and it's still gonna take a really long time for that to come out. And in that video, I asked a bunch of the cast members what the show meant to them. And today, I'd like to share with you the response Kevin Conroy gave me.
This is Kevin Conroy. You know me as Batman.
I am vengeance.
I got your message and your request. What does Batman the Animated Series mean to me? That's a very loaded question, and I bet you get a lot of different responses from everybody, because everyone has a unique relationship to the show. I think what surprised me most when I started doing it was the connection that people have to the character, the audience. There's a passionate connection there. It's very unique. It's not like that for Superman or Wonder Woman or The Flash or any of the other superheroes. There's a really unique identity that people have with Batman. And I asked myself early on, why is that? The best reason I could come up with is because of all the superheroes, he's the one who's not a superhero. He's the one who's got nothing supernatural to rely on. He can't fly, he can't see through walls. He's a man, and he's a very damaged man. He's been beat up by life, brutally seeing his parents murdered in front of him as a child. What's unique about him is how he reacts to that, to the brutality of life. He doesn't let it make him angry or bitter or crush him. He takes that pain and he uses it to transform himself into something magnificent, into like this angel of redemption, wanting to heal the world of evil, which is of course impossible, but he wants to leave the world a better place. And he only has his physical strength to do it. So to me, what Beataz represents is a redemption story, overcoming the tragedies of life, the challenges of life, and overcoming it in a very noble way, so that you want to heal the world of evil. It's a very ennobling story. And that is why I think people react so passionately to him, because we all get challenged by life. We all get beat up by life. Fate is so random. You don't know what's coming tomorrow or next month or next year. You have no control over that. But what you do have control over is how you react to it. You can let those surprises that life throws at you crush you, make you angry, make you bitter, or you can learn from them and take that knowledge and get back into life and contribute to the world. That is a choice we all face every day because we're human. And we all stumble in our lives. We all make mistakes. But that's not what defines us. What defines us is how we get back up, how we learn from our mistakes and get back into life. That's what defines us. So that's what Batman the Animated Series meant to me and means to me, is that ability to absorb life's shocks and those curveballs that life throws at you and turn them into something positive. I hope that helps. Take care.
The truth is, there will never be another Batman like Kevin Conroy, and there will probably never be another man like Kevin Conroy. This is usually the part of the video where I leave off asking you guys to say some quirky phrase somewhat related to the video at hand, but in lieu of a catchphrase, I ask that you instead share your own all-time favorite memories of the character and the man behind him.
You see, I'm both Bruce Wayne and Batman. Not because I have to be. No. Because I choose to be.
And today, I'm here to talk to you about the most underappreciated and underrated Batman of all time. For one reason or another, he's kinda like the forgotten Batman. You know, everyone talks about the guy who came before him and then the guy who showed up after, but not enough people talk about this particular performance. I think that's mainly because he's in between what a lot of people consider the best live-action Batman and what a lot of people consider to be the worst live-action Batman. But I believe that Val Kilmer was one of the greatest actors to ever put on the mask, and today, I'm going to tell you why. Before I even get into talking about Val Kilmer in the role of Batman, let me first explain the insurmountable odds Val Kilmer was up against when he took the part. He was given the very unfortunate and impossible task of following Michael Keaton in the role. 3 years after Keaton defined the darker sides of the Dark Knight, the general public only began gaining an understanding for the character through Keaton's portrayal of him. So fans were more than just a little bit apprehensive about this new guy stepping into the cowl and taking over the role, regardless of how talented he might be. Personally, I don't think fans at the time were ever going to be happy with anyone else besides Mr. Mom. For so many fans, he was Batman, and anything else just paled in comparison. Michael Keaton was Batman, and everyone else was just a cheap knockoff. Val Kilmer wasn't necessarily praised for his performance, but he also wasn't chastised over it. The general feeling seemed to be, yeah, whatever, you're not really Batman because you're not Michael Keaton, but cool suit, dude. Though he had his detractors, he did in fact have some famous fans as well. In his review of Batman Forever, Roger Ebert wrote, Val Kilmer is a completely acceptable substitute for Michael Keaton in the title role. And you know what? I agree. I think Val did a serviceable job. He's a perfectly good Batman, one of my personal favorites. But I think that he works as his own Batman. I know the point and purpose of these movies was to try to continue the franchise. This was seen as a sequel and not a reboot. But I've long since maintained that these movies work better if they're judged separately on their own merit. Batman Forever really doesn't work as a sequel for Batman Returns. And Val Kilmer doesn't really work as Michael Keaton's Batman. Because he's not Michael Keaton's Batman. He's Val Kilmer's Batman. While current continuity has gone out of its way to explain that the two sets of films exist in separate universes, the movies were initially devised to be sequels of the previous two Tim Burton films. Hence some of the returning cast and some of the returning elements. The first Batsuit used in the movie was Michael Keaton's Batsuit, just now with the added benefit of plastic abs and rubber nipples. When Bruce is in his private life, he wears the same glasses as Keaton's Batman. There are even direct scenes from the first two films that were recycled and repeated here in this movie. This was very obviously meant to be a continuation. But point blank, I'm telling you, it doesn't work as one. I think this comes off as an insincere sequel, but a solid standalone adventure that was inspired by the previous movies. Regardless, Michael Keaton is definitely the blueprint here. But Val Kilmer is building on that and doing his own thing with the foundation. If the base of your argument is that Val Kilmer isn't Michael Keaton, then I'm inclined to agree with you because he's not. They're two different people. But that doesn't mean he wasn't good as Batman. Unlike his predecessor and his successor, it seems like Val does try to create a distinction between Batman and Bruce Wayne. I mean, it's not as grand or as night and day as Christian Bale's dual identities, but it's there. Like a much more famous Batman, this one also speaks with a rasp. Although it's significantly toned down and much more minor than, the parody that came out in 2008. There's some distinction between masked and unmasked.
Fully interactive holographs. Only a high-frequency carrier wave beamed directly into the brain could create such images. Agreed. A trauma powerful enough to create an alternate personality leaves the victim.
In a world where normal rules of right and wrong no longer apply.
Exactly.
Where will you go? The circus must be halfway to Metropolis by now.
If Bruce Wayne could have given his life for your family, he would have.
What the hell did you think you were doing?
I understand.
And it's done with purpose, as the dual identity of this character is actually a very important plot point for this particular story. It's kind of used to create a little bit of a comparison. Both Batman and Bruce Wayne and Harvey Dent and Two-Face are one person divided. But what differentiates these two characters outside of which side of the moral compass they fall on is that Harvey is compelled to be two different people, while Bruce Wayne chooses to be. A fact that Edward Nygma can't fully get his head around, and thus can't find a way to beat him. His parents' murder also plays a part in the movie as well, and while that is an important plot point that feels like it's overdone and tiresome with how many times audiences have come to see it at this point, at least here it's used for something other than just reminding the audience why Bruce Wayne is Batman. It's used to create another comparison between Bruce and Robin. They come from completely different backgrounds and lifestyles, but they share the same trauma. Watching their parents die at the hands of a madman. The death of Dick Grayson's parents also kind of forces Bruce to relive his greatest trauma in a way. Watching another family die at the hands of a villain. It causes him to have flashbacks and remember repressed memories of the worst event of his life. Side note here, Bruce, I just want to get this clear. You remembered your parents being murdered perfectly. Like, you remember the pearls flying, the bloodshed, their corpses on the ground. You remember all of that from the first movie, but you repressed going to their funeral? That was the traumatic experience for you? Okay. I kid. Bruce Wayne is really the glue that binds Batman Forever together. All of the characters are related to him in some form or fashion. Those parallels in his life inform him of those he shares a screen with. On some level, Batman can relate to everybody in this movie. This movie is sadly often lumped in with Batman and Robin. A lot of people seem to think that the two are one and the same, split right down the middle. But Batman Forever was not style without substance. The parts of the movie that stuck with me in my adult years were the parts that explored the character's psyche. The bits where we're diving into what makes this character tick. That was something the previous movies intentionally didn't explore. A lot of what made Batman who he was left up to interpretation or shown in the background. It did wonders in terms of adding to the mystique of Batman. But as you may have noticed here on this channel, I prefer analyzing things. It's really unfortunate that a lot of these deeper plot lines were left on the cutting room floor out of fear of being too mature for the demographic. The exploration of a tortured soul riddled with false guilt is so powerful in nature that despite the vast majority of this story being wiped from this movie's runtime, it still breaks through in tiny intervals. And for me, those are the most fascinating parts of Batman Forever. It's what's held my love for this movie and for this version of the character since childhood. One thing that is interesting to see is how the movie handles Bruce Wayne and Batman. It seems that since Batman Returns, both sides of the character have become noted public figures, appearing on the covers of magazines and being highly regarded by the general public. I mean, look at how many people are this close to Batman. That would have never been a thing in the last two movies. This is a total deviation from the Tim Burton films, which had both sides of the character hiding in shadows. This movie brought them both out to light. It's different, but I don't know that both sides of the character should be this hands-on to the public. It feels like a little bit of a mistake not having Batman lurk in the shadows, as Bruce Wayne is blinded by the limelight. Nonetheless, it was nice at least seeing Bruce begin to take on a more public persona. I would say that this development is a good step forward for Bruce Wayne, but maybe a step too far for Batman. So now that we covered what made Batman Forever's Batman, his own Batman, let's talk about the man behind the bat. Val Kilmer. Val Kilmer actually took on the role of Batman without ever reading a script. And when he got the call to play the part, he was inside an actual Batcave where he was researching for an upcoming project. Val, being the spiritual man he is to a fault, decided to take this as a sign. Val had already had a fondness for this character and was passionate about the role. As a child, he loved Batman. In his documentary, he briefly reminisces on being a kid and going to the set of the 1966 Batman series. For all intents and purposes, this casting sounds like a boyhood dream come true. Unfortunately, that dream would feel more like a nightmare once Val got on set. The complexity of the suit actually stifled his movement. He wound up needing assistance to do simple tasks like sitting down and standing back up. His mask also presented a lot of difficulties, making it harder for Kilmer to both hear and breathe. And because of all that, it seems like this took a toll on his overall performance, at least in his own eyes. Val sees his time in the role as mostly inconsequential, and believes that it was the other performances in the movie that carried it. But as an outsider looking in, I'm gonna have to disagree. Not by his performance being weighed down by a skin-tight, half-atomically correct rubber batsuit. I'm sure that was a struggle and a half, and maybe if he didn't have to wear all that, he probably would have been better. But I do think that he got a solid performance out of the role in spite of everything that was working against him. Maybe it wasn't the outcome he'd hoped for, maybe it wasn't the best that he could do, but I think it's passable to say the very least. While his time in the role was unfortunately brief, I do believe it was more than just a little bit noteworthy. Bob Kane even said that Val Kilmer was the closest to the actual Batman vision. And you could trust Bob Kane because he was in the room when Bill Finger was making the character. Some people have claimed that Val Kilmer was a little bit too wooden in the role. But the man was wearing a suit that was 142 degrees and didn't allow him to move around in any type of normal fashion. That's undoubtedly going to take a toll on the end product. I think he perfectly portrays Bruce's stoicism, born from stunted growth and a lifetime of skepticism, which also sort of feel like lingering elements from the last two Burton movies. A man who has closed himself off from people for so long that he's not fully aware of how to properly interact with them. Bruce is constantly stuck in a 1,000-yard stare. The trauma from his childhood is not just a detail the script brings up, but instead, one the actor's performance insists. He's a normal functioning man, but there's something a little bit off. He's seen things, felt pain that he never stopped feeling, pain that a lot of people would never understand, unless they've gone through such an awful experience. I don't want to sound too pretentious when talking about Batman Forever of all things, but both Keaton and Kilmer's versions of the character showcase this level of silent pain. So I think there's a lot more depth to this Batman than meets the eye. What some people have called cardboard, I call a three-dimensional person. And look, Batman for better or worse is a very stoic character. A lot of the time he could come off as monotone. I'm not trying to create any excuses for Kilmer. This is me saying this is better than it probably had any right given all that he was up against. When you take into account all the outside forces that may have somewhat handicapped his overall performance, yeah, this is a pretty good performance. Of course it's not the picture-perfect portrayal, I never need to see, nor did I ever want to see Batman give a big goofy smile after he's just been kissed. It's a little bit too dumb for my liking. Or having the movie start off with Batman giving this quip.
Can I persuade you to take a sandwich with you, sir?
I'll get drive-through.
I could totally see somebody from the studio chiming in going, look guys, we gotta put this in here. These McDonald's glasses aren't gonna sell themselves. And at times, some of Batman's wording does feel off. I can't ever in any context see Batman saying the word chicks.
It's the car, right? Chicks love the car.
It doesn't suit him. Robin, sure.
I want a car. Chicks dig the car.
This is why Superman works alone.
But him? No. Don't even get me started with how Val Kilmer randomly defaults to the hands on the hips heroic pose. I mean, if he was playing Superman, maybe this would be a little bit more acceptable, but I'm not crazy about that here for Batman. The hero pose doesn't really work for the hero who wouldn't pose. Upon re-examining the film for the millionth time, this time with the sole intention of focusing on every little action and micro-action under a magnifying glass, ultimately I think Val Kilmer is a pretty good Bruce Wayne and a pretty okay Batman. I still believe that he's undoubtedly the most underrated Batman. The guy was asked to recapture lightning in a bottle, trying to fill in Michael Keaton's bat shoes, which was an unfair ask of any actor, no matter how talented. As a continuation on the role that Michael Keaton originated, this has to be seen as a failure. But I feel like if it's judged as its own separate performance in its own one-off Batman movie, people would probably be a lot more favorable. It's very obvious in Val's performance that this movie was always meant to serve as a sequel to Batman Returns. Unfortunately, a sequel to Batman Returns, sans Tim Burton and Michael Keaton, was never gonna please anybody. The character's written the same, so Val performs the character as Keaton did to a degree. And credit to him for being able to somewhat come across as the same character, despite looking and sounding nothing like his predecessor. But even more credit to him that he was able to look like an evolution of that character, allowing Val to kind of put his own spin on Bruce Wayne. You see, he's still the same awkward loner who lives in shadows both literally and metaphorically, but here he's also allowed to be charming. He still doesn't always pick up on or intentionally ignore social cues, but he's not made to look good in those moments that he does that here. If anything, they're highlights as flaws of his character. Val Kilmer's Batman, more than anything else, is a man. A man with faults and flaws, and I think the same could be said for his overall performance. There's definitely some bad here, but there's also plenty of good. And I personally feel like there's a lot more to love than there is to hate.
So how does it feel to go under the cowl for the second time in about 8 years?
Was it 8 years? Was Under the Red Hood 8 years ago? Way too long. Way too long.
When the conversation of Best Batman comes up, typically those talks center around the live-action actors, and Kevin Conroy, who kind of became one of those live-action actors to play the part later in life, though that has very little to do with today's topic. However, that exchange of best of the best doesn't typically extend to the many voice actors who have portrayed the Dark Knight over the years, which is a shame because we've had some really interesting iterations of this character with a lot of talented actors in the role. Case in point, the subject of today's video, the man I find to be the most underrated Batman ever animated. To me, the greatest actor not named Kevin Conroy to play Bruce Wayne is actually another Bruce, that being Bruce Greenwood. And I can't be the only person who thinks that either, as he's already reprised this role in animation more times than most live-action Batman actors have ever been asked to put on the cape and cowl, playing the part in movies like Batman Under the Red Hood, A Death in the Family, and Gotham by Gaslight, as well as acting as the Dark Knight in a reoccurring role on the show Young Justice. I don't know why more people aren't singing his graces, but I'm here to try to carry a little tune on his behalf. Bruce Greenwood does the Justice Leaguer justice, managing to find the perfect balance in terms of performance, sounding stoic but never stilted. You could very easily hear Kevin Conroy delivering these lines the way that he does, but having said that, he also doesn't sound anything like Kevin Conroy when he's delivering his lines.
There's big shoes back there. It was important for me not to see what Kevin had done, so I didn't. I purposely stayed away from that, and because otherwise I thought, I'd either end up copying it inadvertently or or trying to stay away from it and missing another mark.
He's audibly intimidating, but his voice never sounds like it's an attempt at intimidation. Greenwood sounds very authentic and natural in the part, with his voice never feeling put on or forced. He's just a naturally scary sounding dude. He sounds gruff. His voice is a little coarse, but not to the point of parody.
Go home.
Am home.
Home to mommy. What did you do to Jason? Act like you don't know what I'm talking about, and I'll dislocate the shoulder. That's just to start.
I think he succeeds where a lot of other Batman performances have failed, because there's some similarity in terms of tone to other Batmen. Like take for example Billy Baldwin or Jason O'Mara. And while neither of those two actors are exactly my favorite Batman, as I find it hard to fully appreciate their attempts, I can definitely see the value in this vocal performance. This Batman has a very authoritative tone, which really suits the character, especially in the Young Justice series, where he's basically acting as a chaperone to the main characters. He's very stern and has a what I say goes attitude at all times. When he says something, that's all there is to it. It's definitive. He doesn't ask questions, he just gives commands. He doesn't speak in sentences, he makes declarative statements. Greenwood embodied the persona while still showcasing the person underneath it. He brought a very human element to this Batman performance. He carries the same monotone tone throughout all of these projects, and yet it's never one note.
The voice, I mean, what do you have to sort of do to become Batman? Is there something, a certain voice you did?
It's not a voice thing as much as it is a point of view and an emotional thing.
Despite never quite articulating himself to others, it's no mystery how he's feeling in every given moment. The passion and at times pain of the man behind the mask comes through in his performance. Like when he has to explain himself to the son that he thought he'd lost forever.
I don't want to fight you.
All evidence to the contrary.
Please, I can help you.
A day doesn't go by when I don't think about subjecting him to every horrendous torture he's dealt out to others, and then end him.
I can't. I'm sorry.
Or when he's giving a lecture of the importance of being a parent to Superman, when Clark's not keen on stepping up and being a father to his clone.
The boy needs you. He's here. You have to get over the how and why. This boy needs his father.
I'm not his father.
Through various projects, Greenwood really showcased Batman's humanity, grounding Bruce with a very evident moral compass, wanting to not only clean up crime, but to also help heal the world. He gave us a Batman that felt true to form, feeling just as much man as he did Batman. Now, you can make an argument that this has more to do with the way the part was written, and there's some validity in that statement, but when you consider that while this was the same actor playing Batman, it was actually a bunch of different Batmans in a bunch of different Batman projects, movies and TV shows that shared absolutely no continuity. Writing has a lot to do with the success of this variant of the hero, as Greenwood's only played the part in quality Batman films and shows. But I'd argue that he's a big part of the quality of these products overall, bringing a voice to the character with a quality performance, handling heavy material with an endless acting arsenal, without the need for any other contingency plan. But more than anything else that I've listed up until this point, Bruce Greenwood just sounds like Batman. I know it's not really a deep and meaningful take. Like, I try to break it down and be very analytical, but just generally speaking, when I hear this guy, I just think, oh yeah, that's Batman. That's Batman's voice. That's how Batman sounds. That voice coming out of these character models just feels so right, which is something I can only credit about 2 or 3 other actors with overall. Sorry, Arpats, we're not quite there yet. That's the one thing you didn't have going for you in my eyes. It's hard to really talk in depth about this actor in this role because there just isn't a whole lot to critique. I can't think of a singular way to improve this performance. I can't name so much as one moment where something felt off. I enjoy his time in the role, and I hope that we get to see more of it in the future. But even if we don't, I'm happy with what we got. Like I said before, this is what I believe to be the most underrated Batman that we've ever gotten. And that's given the praise that he's already received for this role. Even in saying that, it's still not enough. I really think he should be acknowledged and appreciated more than he is. So in case anyone hasn't handed you your roses yet, Here they are, Greenwood. You are the best Bruce, named Bruce.
I'm Hope.
I say this with no hyperbole. The Batman is my all-time favorite Batman movie. It's a movie that I think properly portrays the character and captures elements from the source in ways I don't think any Batman movie made prior to this has. One of the most important elements, of course, being its depiction of the Dark Knight himself. And that's why I'm here to talk to you about the Batman in The Batman. Now, I know this is a very divisive performance. You either love it or you hate it for a variety of reasons. Personally, I love it. And I think that some of the people who hate on it might be missing the point a little bit. Now, that's not to say that this performance is immune to criticism. It's not. No performance is. But the arguments I've heard as to why this is a bad Batman performance, they're also some of the reasons why I think this is one of the all-time greatest Batman performances. Aesthetically speaking, I think this is absolutely the coolest on-screen Batsuit. I rank it right up there with the suit from Batman Returns. I really dig the armor getup, as not only does it make for a great look, but it does genuinely look protective, so its placement feels legitimate and justified. It's practical and purposeful. I always thought that the suit from The Dark Knight looked effective. I dug that it looked like armor, but I couldn't help but feel like it looked a little bit too bland and a little bit goofy. But the Batman gives you the best of both worlds. You can understand why someone would use this in battle, and you can also understand why they'd put it on a movie poster. It sort of reminds me of the suit from Arkham Origins, but like that suit meets the suit from Injustice. And seeing as those are two of my all-time favorite Batman attires, I'm not complaining, because I think it looks great. The only thing I'm not 100% on board with are those wristbands. I'm not really crazy about them, but they're also not the worst thing ever. They're kinda growing on me. I mean, I'm not learning to like them, but I'm becoming more tolerant of them over time. And most importantly, and before I even say it, let me go out of my way to say, I know this shouldn't matter. I know that I shouldn't care about it, but it does and I do. It matters incredibly to me. I'm really glad that they showed the black around Bruce's eyes. It's a small detail, but it's one that's gone overlooked forever now, and it has never not bugged me. Especially when we see Batman unmasked in some of these movies. He has raccoon eyes when he has the mask on and a fresh face when he takes it off. I can't stand that shit. So props to the Batman for actually incorporating this into the movie. What's often talked down on is the fact that this Batman is all bat and no man. The Batman character is typically broken down into two different personas, those being Batman and Bruce Wayne. One of these is the actual person, and the other is the persona. And surprisingly, the one without the mask is the actual disguise. But in the Batman, there is no such separation. Bruce Wayne is just always Batman, with or without the mask. There's no public persona because this Bruce Wayne doesn't go out in public. Like his nighttime personality, Bruce spends all of his time lurking in shadows, watching society as a spectator but never actually involving himself with it. This Batman is a total recluse, a natural loner. He's a man stunted by the trauma he experienced at a crucial developmental age, destined to live the rest of his days stuck in neutral, emotionally paralyzed by the shock. This Batman, more than any other, still has his parents' death hanging above his head. His silence speaks volumes. He is still incredibly weighed down by that trauma, so much so that he spends his life closed off from the society that caused him such pain. He's broken to the point of almost being shattered entirely. What I really love is that his parents play an integral part in this story. Their presence isn't shown in a flashback or a dream sequence showing their death, but instead shown in the pain in Pattinson's performance. There's something so genuine in the sad, aimless way that Robert Pattinson plays Bruce Wayne. He makes Batman feel like a real person, a fundamentally flawed individual desperate to do the right thing, even when he's not entirely sure what that is. The guy may have his parents' money, but he doesn't have their social standing. This Bruce Wayne was socially distant before COVID was even a thing. Not only is he not a social butterfly, But he's not even a social caterpillar, not even a social butterfly egg. Now listen, it's up for argument and debate where his fighting and detective skills are at, but I think universally we can agree that his people skills here are at an all-time low. He's not making any friends. Bruce Wayne is a ghost amongst us. To be honest with you, with the way the story plays out and the way that Bruce is depicted as being a societal stranger, I don't think him having a playboy personality would have felt all that authentic. The whole Bruce Wayne character would kind of contradict the narrative. This Bruce isn't people privy yet. He doesn't like to be amongst people. It doesn't seem like he ever really spent enough time around them to figure them out. That's not to say that this Bruce will never be able to play that part, just he's not there yet. He hasn't had enough prep time. People attempting to discredit the movie for not having Pattinson play the part more smooth and suave really should be praising the project for showing how much the cowl has consumed his life. And not just his life, but his identity. Bruce is so hyper-fixated on his role as a vigilante that he doesn't even have enough time to pretend he has a social life. We get a real feel for the deep, unhealthy obsession Bruce has with crime fighting. It's all that he lives for. He can't be bothered putting on airs. In the context of this particular movie, Bruce Wayne's infamous reputation is not needed. It's not right for the plot, and it's not right for the character. He just doesn't have use for that lifestyle yet. He hasn't figured out that he can do good both with and without the mask. This Bruce Wayne only exists when Batman needs to do some detective work incognito. Like I said, he just doesn't have use for this lifestyle yet. Actually, come to think of it, he doesn't have use for any type of lifestyle. The people in his alleged personal life don't know him personally. He's closed himself off from absolutely everyone, even those close to him.
Somebody said they were close to me?
He acts exactly like you'd think someone who spent his time in shadows would act. How a human who became an alien in his own society would interact with that familiar yet foreign civilization. Even the way this Batman walks and moves feels a little bit off. He sort of glides around. There's almost a phantom-like feel to his movements. And it's the details like this that allure people to Batman. The guy's a total outsider, and it makes the few interactions he has feel that much more awkward. Look at how he interacts even with those who know and love him. He's socially scarred. This movie doesn't glorify or glamorize what it means to be Batman. Instead, it shines a light on all the ugly sides of the job. The toll this work takes on him, not just physically, but mentally as well. He's clearly unhealthy and unwell. This Batman feels as disturbed as the criminals he comes across, and Pattinson really captures Bruce's tortured psyche. He does so in ways that I don't think we've ever seen from a live-action Batman performance before. This movie doesn't make it look cool to be Batman. Instead, they portray it as the horrifically soul-draining experience it has to be, and it emphasizes the profound effect the mantle has on the man. This Batman doesn't feel fully in control of his emotions. It almost feels like that he himself is mere seconds away from snapping. He spends so much of the movie trying to get into the mind of a monster that he almost gets trapped there.
Like a wise man once said, battle not with monsters, lest you become a monster.
He's prone to aggressive outbursts, and we see him lose his cool entirely on an occasion or two. This Batman feels much more unstable than previous Batmen have. Bruce is constantly keeping Alfred at arm's distance, never openly expressing how thankful he is for his services. Bruce and Alfred's relationship is strained to say the least, and that's the person who is closest to him. That's who he spends nearly every day with. The only man he's had as a father figure since he was about 8 years old, and yet he doesn't seem concerned with his presence at all. Alfred takes a bomb to the face, and as soon as he wakes up from a coma, he's met with... lied to me. There's a lot of hostility between he and Alfred. It's all one-sided and mostly makes Bruce seem like an angsty child lashing out at their parent, but the tension is very much there. In some ways, it feels like Bruce blames Alfred for gatekeeping the details of his parents' murder. But ultimately, what isn't revealed to him is only kept secret as to shield him from the truth. His parents were imperfect people, and in a moment of weakness, and more importantly, fear, his father made the wrong decision, trusted the wrong person. And ultimately, his decision, while somewhat justified, ended a man's life. All Alfred has ever done, he's done to protect Bruce. But Bruce, being the bat that he is blind to that. I think this portion of the film is tragically cut short, with very little payoff. It's probably the most disappointing arc this movie has to offer. It's good for what it was, but I just wish there was a little bit more of it. I can only hope that there's a further elaboration and exploration of this theme in the follow-up film. Alfred is far from the only person Bruce has a tumultuous relationship with. He has plenty of problems with the city that he's sworn to protect. I love the opening to The Batman. As a matter of fact, I think it may be my favorite part of the movie. It's a nice, subtle way of introducing the character of Batman, but more importantly, introducing the character of Gotham City. Instantaneously, we're shown how crime-ridden these streets have become, and we're let in on how far the corruption goes. In a matter of moments, we're given a brutal but accurate depiction of the city. But what I really love about this intro, more than anything else, is the perspective. Sure, we're hearing Batman's inner thoughts as Bruce provides the opening narration, but it's not his point of view that we're seeing. It's the city criminals. And I think that we learn a lot more about Batman's relationship with Gotham through their eyes. We see the fear that the Batman creates in the heart of the immoral and the unjust. This is something that is often talked about in Batman projects, but I don't think it's ever been shown quite as well. We're shown gang members, robbers, random thugs, all looking over their shoulder, afraid of being on the Bat's radar. You have all these bad dudes see that symbol in the sky, and you can, for that very moment, feel their fear as they pray that it's not them he's after. So from the very beginning, Batman's presence holds weight. Before he's ever even appeared on screen, his impact is felt. I've always really liked the idea of seeing Batman from the perspective of those he encounters. I think it really adds to, and more importantly, highlights the mystique of the character. When you think about it, we the viewers are kind of spoiled when it comes to the Dark Knight. Like, he's still cool, guy's gonna win all kinds of popularity contests, but we're too intimately involved with the character. We know his name, face, family, friends. We know his inner thoughts and feelings because of text bubbles and narration. We know the dueling sides of his personality. As a character, we know Batman. We know Bruce Wayne. And because of this, he's a little bit less intimidating. We have a reasonable idea for what his thoughts are in every given moment. We understand what his next moves are because we were able to study him in passing. We don't just see the mask, we see the man underneath it as well. But in The Batman, we're kind of reintroduced to the character by seeing him through the eyes of those who don't know him, but live in fear of him. There is no such comfort with this character. We're just immediately shown his violent vigilantism. Furthermore, since this Batman is a Batman in his very early years, and he's only just begun protecting the innocent and hurting those responsible, you also get the feeling that there's no such comfort for these thugs either. Batman hasn't been around long enough for anyone to latch on to his moves and fighting style, or hell, even his morals. Sure, this guy has a no-kill rule, but they don't know that. They're instead thrust into a one-on-one with this strange specter who stepped from the shadows. Even those he saves aren't entirely sure of what to make of him. Even the police, who he seems to have some sort of working relationship in this, are wary about him. When they're not blatantly talking shit, they're staring him down and giving him side eyes. These police officers are just looking at this man in a cape going, I know that Bat doesn't have a badge. The movie really did itself a favor by setting the events of the film within Batman's second year. Because everyone knows of Batman, but no one really knows Batman. The guy's like a total Batman of mystery, which is good. I think the less familiar Gothamites are of Batman, the more the drama is heightened. There is so much more that can go wrong if the people that you're protecting don't know that you're trying to protect them. The margin for error is significantly expanded. The movie manages to tell us a lot more by introducing us to the concept of Batman before actually introducing us to Batman. More than just learning about Batman's perception, we're learning about the perception of Batman. And I think this serves as the perfect introduction of the character. I've heard some people claim that the Catwoman-Batman relationship in this sucked, and that the two lacked any chemistry and it made their scenes together awkward, but I don't really think that's the case. I mean, yes, I do think that there's an awkwardness to them, but that seems more by design than it does by mistake. And even if it wasn't, I think it works very well in the narrative's favor. Batman takes a liking to Selina instantaneously. There's not a lot of development there. He just sees her and then he's like, damn, I gotta get me some of that pussycat. But isn't that to be expected of a person who hasn't had a lot of human interaction? Of course he's attracted to the first pretty face that looks at him. Not to mention that despite her rough exterior, she clearly still has a good heart. She's not a bad person, she's a good person who just sometimes does bad things. And for the world that she's involved in, sure, she could see that this dude is a total weirdo from a mile away, but a well-meaning person who's able to handle himself and help others is more than just a rarity. It makes sense that these two strange strangers would be drawn to each other. They're both in their own right protectors, and protectors who don't have anybody protecting them. Their interactions are usually stilted, but their dynamic to me makes sense. Plus, I feel like all the awkwardness comes from the man cosplaying as a bat. The cat lady is perfectly normal here, which is a sentence that has probably never been said before. If there was any dynamic in this movie that stood out above the rest for me, it's the Batman and Jim Gordon dynamic. And I can honestly say, this is my favorite version of these two characters in live action. Or at least on their situationship. Don't get me wrong, I was very fond of how the Dark Knight movies portrayed the two. But I think in the Batman more than there, the two come across as partners. They were always allies before, but you get a real sense of the two actually being a cohesive team. Not only does Gordon bring Batman onto active crime scenes to aid in GCPD investigations, but the two also operate outside the system entirely together. What makes this incredibly impactful is that this isn't a friendship. Make no mistake, these two are not friends, they're almost strangers. Technically speaking, one of them doesn't even know who the other is. This is a partnership brought on by a shared need for justice and a mutual respect. Gordon actually trusts Batman more than he trusts people on his force. He relies more on a masked stranger than he does on those who share his uniform. I find this association to be one of the all-time highlights of the film. It's also probably the closest thing to a healthy relationship this Batman has. Though I guess it shouldn't come off as a real shock, considering that this union is brought on by a shared interest in Bruce's obsession. If anything, this is the one healthy extension to Bruce's unhealthy infatuation. Another interesting relationship is the one between the Batman and the Riddler. The movie sets these characters up to juxtapose them against each other. The two are incredibly intelligent, masked vigilantes who are looking to rid Gotham of crime. And then underneath their masks, they're two overly obsessed orphans. On paper, the two sound quite alike, but in execution, they couldn't be any more different. Yet it is in fact Batman who inspired the Riddler's actions. Without knowing it himself, he helped influence this madman. This crazed nut who doesn't see himself as the Dark Knight's enemy, but instead his ally, playing some sort of twisted game with him. The Riddler takes Batman's act to new extremes, leaving behind piles of bodies in his wake. He becomes a public punisher, putting the corrupt out on display and using death to discipline them. In his mind, he and Batman are just alike, two branches from the same tree. But to Batman, they're not even in the same rainforest. What I really love about Batman's relationships in the Batman is how each person unknowingly contributes to the making of the Dark Knight. These characters supply this young vigilante with a mind and heart like a sponge. Whether they're conscious of it or not, they're adding to the mythos of the world's greatest detective, essentially becoming the blueprint of the hero's morals and ideals. This Batman is depicted as being a little bit judgmental at first. He had his own beliefs on criminals, believing them all to be selfish and immoral, but he realizes through his interactions with Selina that sometimes it's easier to persecute than it is to understand. He figures out that his upbringing wasn't the same as everyone else's. Not everyone is functioning under the same frequency, living life having the same experiences. And from the admittedly very privileged life that Bruce leads, he has the ability to wag his finger at others for stealing, because he himself has never had to do that to get by. The idea of stealing is so foreign to him, but he sees this action as being a determining factor if someone is good or bad, rather than seeing it as people struggling to survive. Maybe that person is stealing because that's all they can do. I credit this Batman for being hard-headed, but not so stonewalled and set in his ways that he blocks out differing perspectives. Catwoman unintentionally makes Bruce a better Batman, simply by knowing him and offering up a different worldly perception. Batman's talks with the mayoral candidate make him realize that he isn't alone in his mission. He he's not the only one doing their part. He also realizes that despite all that he's doing, he could still do more. Batman is always going to be essential. It is Bruce's major contribution in life. That contribution essentially being his life itself. But Bruce Wayne can also be an instrument of good. The persona wasn't just developed to throw enemies off his trail. It was also created to contribute major donations to charities in need and to give to a community that isn't given all that much. The eventual mayor, sorry for spoilers, gives Bruce this very epiphany. And it makes it feel like this movie closes not with an ending, but instead with a new beginning. The start of the next chapter in this Batman's legacy. In addition, it's also because of how he inspired the Riddler that he realizes he needs to make a change. He can't seek justice acting solely on vengeance. It's just not enough. So moving forward, he makes the conscious decision to try and represent hope. Not just fighting crime, but also providing comfort to the unfortunate. Adding compassion to his arsenal. Showing the good that they're not alone. And that there is more than just wicked in this cesspool that is Gotham City. This Batman may have been born out of vengeance, but he lived to become a symbol of hope. He still pursues justice, but his reasoning for doing so is different now. It seems much more selfless. He's no longer just blindly trying to avenge the ghost of parents he heroicized. This Batman is now trying to make a difference. Still fighting, but now fighting for a better world where no one else would have to go through what he went through. I credit the Riddler with this, but I think it's actually a combination of Bruce being inspired by the other heroic and anti-heroic figures the city has, while also fearing what he could become, what he could inspire, what he might currently be seen as. All of these characters unknowingly guide Bruce down the path of becoming the symbol. Which, apparently, is also a point of contention for people, because they don't like seeing Batman being led. But a Batman who doesn't learn is a Batman who doesn't succeed. When you think of the standard interpretation of the character, you're seeing the sum of all different types of training and life experience melded into this one person. Someone who's been taught by Ra's al Ghul in the League of Assassins, Henry Ducard, and Alfred, amongst others. You're not seeing this Batman learn from others because you're seeing a final product. This Batman ain't there yet. So reasonably, I would think this Batman should be learning along the way. The Batman I know is a Batman who's learned from people from all different walks of life, and used that information to become the best version of himself that he could be. So not only do I not mind this Batman being in the learner seat, but I also wouldn't have him anywhere else. The fact that he doesn't know as much as we're used to is not discrediting Batman, it's showing how this Batman's youth and inexperience may play against him. Another really great benefit to come from making Batman a rookie is that it powers him down. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey V, how can he be powered down? Batman doesn't even have powers. Batman's just a man. Yes, Batman is just a man. A man who's been trained by the most deadly assassins the world has ever known, with an infinity amount of money and gadgets and overall detective knowledge, who can stop anybody doing anything so long as he's granted prep time. Oh yeah, that, and he's also got an entire squad behind him who all have the same exact skills, and when he's not hanging out with them, he's with his super friends. Yeah, I don't care if the guy is human. It's about time that we admit to ourselves here, as much as we may love him, Batman is ridiculously OP'd. Which is why I think if you want to tell a really good Batman story, you either need to go to the start, or stop by around the end. For me personally, the best Batman stories are stories centered around when the character was either really old or when the character is really young. You can't just put Batman in his prime out there and expect anyone to think that he's not going to make it out of the situation. Old Batman works because while he's had all this training and all this life experience, he's still an old man. The passage of time is working against him. The man could still kick someone's ass, but there's no guarantee that he won't break his hip doing so. He's not as fast as he once was, he's probably not as strong as he once was, and he's also significantly more fragile than he once was. Not to mention that the experience that he's gotten may be null and void at this point in life. The world changes, and so do the criminals in it. Alternatively, young Batman may be inexperienced, and may even be less thoughtful or bright due to being significantly greener. Perhaps his lack of time put in makes him a second-rate detective. Maybe he didn't complete his Batman training yet. he may not be as skillful or resourceful as the Batman that we know. Now, that's not to say that he's particularly bad in any of these fields, but that's to say that a much younger version of the character would be much less good, which gives some more realistic leeway for villains to get one over on the Caped Crusader. There are so many more possibilities with a Batman who is still learning, rather than a Batman who has already learned. Personally, I'd love to see a Batman movie series that only ended when he became the Batman of legend. Don't start us with him in his prime, end it with him in his prime. I find it really bizarre that some internet personalities are trying to claim Batman is underdeveloped in this movie when this movie is all about the development of Batman. He grows both as a hero and a person throughout the runtime. He's continually progressing with each and every scene that he's in, and every interaction that he has. By the end of the film, Batman's motivations completely change. While he's introduced as a broody, brutal beat-em-upper, the movie ends showcasing him as a selfless savior, a hero. What I love about this movie is what seems to be the direction. It allows an audience to witness Batman's defining moments. This movie is essentially a making-of movie, seeing Batman transition from vigilante to full-blown hero, showing him letting go of his vengeance and embracing hope. Some people seem to find this to be counterproductive to Batman's cause, probably because there's a lot of people out there who believe Batman is vengeance. And to be fair to them, there's plenty of valid reason to think that. I mean, it's only been told to us over and over again by the guy himself.
I am vengeance. I am vengeance.
I'm vengeance.
Vengeance.
The word Batman and vengeance seem to coexist often, so I could totally see why someone would say Batman is vengeance, because it's sorta true. Although I think that statement should come with a little bit of an asterisk, because Batman isn't just vengeance. What often gets understated is Batman's compassion. Everyone's so quick to talk about what he can or can't do or who he could take on reasonably. They get so wrapped up in the fighting and contingency plans that the character's heart often gets totally overlooked. Luckily, this film didn't make that mistake. This Batman, while silent and scary, isn't beyond sentiment. He's definitely closed off, but he's still very clearly empathetic. That final speech at the end of the movie isn't Batman dismissing his Crusader career. This isn't him hanging up the cape. This is him realizing that vengeance isn't all that drives him. He's not just trying to strike fear in the hearts of the bad. He's also trying to provide comfort to the good. So I think a lot of those claims are completely without merit. I just don't think that people are used to seeing Batman be a work in progress. But I think because he is, it gives fans more to look forward to as time rolls on. The character saw an incredible evolution in this movie. I think it'd be a real shame if that evolution stops here. Now, I will admit, if this performance is the be-all, end-all, and we do not, in fact, see a steady progression from man to symbol, I do think some of this might lose its charm. I would definitely look at this interpretation differently, and I probably wouldn't like it as much as I do right now, but I also wouldn't dislike it. Pattinson is enough of the Batman I know for me to be fond of his time in the role. And I think that in general is a phrase that accurately describes everything done with Batman in this movie. Just enough. As a crime fighter, he's effective. He's a solid fighter, but he rarely leaves battles without bruises. There's some well-timed punches thrown and dodged, but there's also some well-timed punches thrown at him that absolutely connect. In terms of his detective skills, he's very perceptive, but he's still green in the field. While he may pick up on things that Gotham's finest overlook, he himself is not beyond making similar mistakes. And when he does have the answers, they don't just come to him effortlessly. Sometimes he needs to do a couple mental laps before arriving at the destination. Ultimately, what I truly love about this take on the character is how Robert Pattinson captures a lot of the character's core elements while not coming off as a total replication. He excels in Bruce's natural stoicism, his lack of reaction to major moments, his stern cadence, managing to make his words sound both monotone but meaningful. In a lot of ways, he's the Batman I know and love. However, there's certain characteristics that this Batman doesn't possess at all. He doesn't speak with the same level of confidence you'd expect Batman to speak with. There's no surety in his words or actions. The guy's constantly second-guessing himself. But I don't think this is so much a flaw in the performance as it is a function of the character. This Batman is not the myth. He's the man creating it. If he doesn't seem sure of what he's doing, it's because he's not. This movie lends just enough credibility to Batman without making him feel complete. Robert Pattinson's Batman is the most human of the bunch. It's a fantastic performance by a great actor in a series that has unlimited potential. Do I think he's the best Batman? Well, no. Not yet, anyway. But you know something? I think he just might be in time. I love the Batman, and I love the Batman in the Batman. You know what, Rob? I hated you back when I was in high school, because I had to sit through every one of those dog shit Twilight movies because the girls that I dated around that time loved those things. You basically slaughtered the very concept of vampires, and you did it with a glitter bomb. But after the Batman, all's been forgiven. We're even, man. I mean, between this and the Lighthouse, we're good. Clean slate. Come over anytime. And if you love this video and would be interested in hearing me talk more about the characters in the Batman, let me know in the comment section below by leaving a comment saying,
I'm vengeance.
With all that being said, I was your least favorite YouTuber, V Infuso, and I thank you for watching. Hope to see you in the next one.
I am vengeance. I am the night, and that was V Infuso. Just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out.
So, if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too would like to become a V-generate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, nerds!
And if you're not joining the fun, you're in for one bad day. And you know what they say about having one bad day?
Catch him next time. Same bat time, same bat channel.